very long time, and it is so nice to see everybody. So we don't have a lot of people here, but we are very grateful that everybody was able to come, that we're able to hold the meeting, and we just want to thank you for coming to our meeting. So it's been quite a long time, but it's sure great to see everybody. So we're just going to talk about a couple things before our speakers start. So in the newsletter, Jimmy had discussed that we will be offering queens. So if you are interested in queening in the fall, that is an option, and that is something that you would want to talk to Jimmy about. We haven't normally offered that in the past, but Bee Weaver has offered us the opportunity to purchase bees. So if you are interested in requeening in the fall, Jimmy can discuss with that individually, or we can do it during our half break, why it would be a good idea if you want to requeen in the fall. And the other thing, we do a drawing for those of you who have never been to the meeting before. We offer a couple door prizes. So if you haven't, make sure you sign in the back, and then you get a little ticket, and we'll draw names at that. And we normally have little kids here who they're a lot of fun to hand out the door prizes. Jimmy, do you want to talk about that?
No, just tell them just whatever I said. Honey going to the state fair.
Okay. What Jimmy said.
Oh,
I got my glasses.
Yeah. Chris has alerted us that John Talbot said they were going to need honey for the state fair. They didn't have the state fair last year, so this is kind of a new thing this year. But we are going to offer you an opportunity to give you a free jar if you want to go home and put up a pound of honey and get it back to me so that you can go to the state fair and be displayed in the state fair honey booth for the 21 days of the state fair. So your honey will be on display. It'll be the last week in September all the way through the third weekend in October.
And when do they need to have that to you?
PDQ.
Okay.
And you can notify me or bring it to the Boss Farm, either one. If you put where you picked up your bees at, I'll be taking honey out there too. So.
Okay.
And Jimmy, after the state fair, it goes to a children's home.
Yes, it
does. All right. So the last thing we're going to have two speakers tonight. The first will be Lance Wilson. Lance is a master beekeeper. He's been beekeeping for about 12 years. So when he became a master beekeeper, they did not offer that certification in the state of Texas. So he went to Georgia. I forget so quickly. He went to Georgia and became a certified master beekeeper. He has 12 or 15 hives. He's a hobbyist. So like a lot of us, we do it for the fun and because it's a distraction from reality. So, and from our children. So, and then we'll also have Dennis Herbert. I'm so sorry. I didn't put my glasses on. He will be talking about ag exemption. So first we'll have Lance and then Dennis. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and let Lance go ahead and start. For those of you on Zoom, I believe.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for having me. Looks like we're back somehow. It's been a while, hasn't it? I think we'll just go ahead and jump into everything, and because we've got such a small group here, if you guys have questions while the presentation is going on, go ahead and raise your hand, and we can get to it. Okay, these are my 10 best practices in modern beekeeping. Other people will disagree. What you'll find out about beekeepers is they really don't agree about very much. So I just want to make it clear that this is my personal 10 best practices. It may not be compatible with your own personal philosophy of beekeeping. That's entirely up to you. But hopefully this will give you something to at least think about it. The first problem, the biggest problem we have, of course, is controlling varroa. So controlling varroa is our primary issue. Basically, varroa arrived in the United States in 1987 and just kind of inundated the whole, both the feral and the managed populations in the United States. It's considered to be 70%. Okay. It's thought to be 70% of the problem in beekeeping. And so the good news is, if you you're able to incorporate various techniques and tasks within your apiary management system to solve this problem and control your varroa mites, it means you solve most of your problems in beekeeping. But anyway, so there was a Southern California study that took place in the early 90s, and they did basically a survey of the feral colonies to realize that 90 to 95% of the feral colonies had been basically collapsed by the varroa mite. So this is a really big deal, as you can imagine. But there was a study in 2010, in fact, in the nation of Canada, and they were able to associate 85% of all of their managed colony collapses, either directly or indirectly, to the varroa mite. So this resulted in a huge sea change in regards to what we do as beekeepers in order to keep our colonies alive. So basically, the first question is, what is varroa? What basically is the varroa mite? Well, fortunately for you, because of the latest in our ability to look really close up and personal, because of the latest technology in photographing varroa mites, you're able to see what a varroa mite looks like up close and personal. It looks apparently exactly like this. Next slide. Of course, it doesn't look exactly like this. But the point is that effectively all a varroa mite is a little vampire, right? More specifically, it is an ectoparasite obligate. And that's a real fancy biological term. And all that means that in the relationship between a host and a parasite, which is what you have, the bee being the host and the varroa mite being the parasite, that it is an ectoparasite feeding on the outside of the host. We know this if you've ever seen a varroa mite on a bee. But in addition to that, it's an obligate. And that's a really cool thing to know if you're a beekeeper, because an obligate in a parasitic relationship with a host, what it means is that if the host is gone, because the parasite is an obligate or dependent upon the host for survival, the parasite will also die. So what that means is if you've got a colony collapse due to varroa mites, if your bees are all dead, you shake out your equipment and you can reuse it. It's not a problem. Okay, go ahead. Next one. Okay, so it's really important to understand what the mite population dynamics are in a colony if you're able to control your varroa mite population, because it enables you to time your treatments in such a way that they can be extremely effective. So what you need to understand here is basically you've got the months of the year, January through December, and this is the bee population. These are your bees, and these are your mites. And as you can see early on in January and February, if you've been keeping bees, you realize you don't have a lot of bees in your boxes at that point. And your mite population is also really low. But it ramps up, as you can see, it increases at a pretty dramatic rate. Now, the mite population is doubling every 30 days. So every month you have a 100% increase in your population of your mites, and that's an exponential increase. And what's common with exponential curves is what you've seen here with the mites, but you also see it in our current viral pandemic, is that it seems to be flat and then it just kind of takes off, right? And so that's what you see with the mite population. So early on, as your mite population is increasing at a really big clip, doubling every month, your bee population is also increasing at a very fantastic rate. So if you were to say, let's say May and June, if you're working your bees, and you're basically not likely to ever see a mite on a bee. Not that you don't have mites, but there's just so many bees relative to the mite population, you're just not likely to see them. But if you open up your boxes, let's say in August, you've got a situation where there's typically a pollen dearth this time of year, and as a result, the superorganism is going to curtail its brood production, and because it's extremely environmentally sensitive to the risk of oncoming pollen, because that's what they eat, right? And so as a result, what you see is the bee population decreases because its food intake is lowered. The mite population, because they basically reproduce and brood, is still taking off at a fantastic clip. So in August, you might open up your colony and you actually see a varroa mite. Oh, is that an answer? Oh, pointer, great. Appreciate that. And that's okay. So as a consequence, at this point, you might open up your box and you see it, you're looking at your bees and you see a mite and you say, oh my gosh, I've got mites. No, man, you've had mites all along. Your mite population has been increasing at an incredibly dramatic rate. It's just been entirely invisible to you. Now, the problem with that is by the time you see a mite, if you somehow had magical powers and you could wave a magic wand and kill every single mite in your box, the problem is that so many bees have been bitten and injected with a viral load by so many mites that even after you kill your mite population, you've got a second dynamic. I'm in a little trouble with this. I'll just hold it. You're having a second dynamic of the viruses just careening throughout your colony. And really, the truth is that although the varroa mite creates mechanical damage to the bee, what's actually collapsing the colonies is the viral load. The mite is the vector for the viral load, and it's a cocktail of viruses. And some cocktails of viruses are going to be more virulent or damaging to a colony than others. But the varroa mite selects for the most damaging form of the virus, regardless of the virus type. It's especially problematic because you've got all these bees loaded down with these viruses, and you're going down into the winter. Now, during the period of, say, September, October, and November, your colony is building what's referred to as winter bees. These bees are a population of bees that are physiologically much different than the bees that existed throughout the earlier part of the year. They contain huge vitellogenin stores, which these are fatty protein stores that these particular bees that are born here have a proclivity or ability to store a huge amount of this. And this is what's necessary, as you can well imagine, because they've got to get through the winter, right? So they need a lot of fat and protein stores. So if you're going into the winter with all these huge viral loads, with all these dirty bees, they're basically not likely to make it. And that's why you see a lot of varroa viral collapse in the winter. Let's go to the next one. Okay, and so this again has everything to do with the mite being a vector for the viral load, much in the same way as malaria, or the mosquito is the vector for malaria. Humans don't transmit malaria person to person, but they have the vector. And like malaria, the only way to control for malaria is through killing the mosquito, the vector. Same way with us. The only way really to control viral loads is by controlling the vector, which for us is the varroa mite. And so effectively, basically, if you're waiting till you see a mite on a bee to think that you've got mites and you need to do something, it's just like basically shutting the door to the barn after the horse is gone. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so there's all sorts of symptoms of collapse. The most common symptom that you're going to see early on is brood kill. This is what's referred to as parasitic mite syndrome or idiopathic brood disease. And what it means is that the mite, as the mite is basically feeding on the larvae or larvae in development, it's infecting it with this huge viral load, and then it's basically killing a lot of your brood. And the thing that's uniquely diagnostic of parasitic mite syndrome compared to other brood diseases is that it will interrupt or kill every single level of development of immature brood. In other words, it kills the real young larvae, the intermediate age larvae, it'll kill the old larvae, it'll kill the pre-pupa, the pupa, and that's why you see all forms of death on various age levels in your brood. When you see this, it's very hard to pull a colony out of that because your viral concentrations and titers are so high. And then in terms of your actual adult bees, at very high concentrations, what you're going to see is that bees will be born with these deformed wings because of the deformed wing virus. Again, you only see this at very high concentration of viral loads. So by the time you start seeing this, and the horse has already cruised out of the barn, you're in big trouble. Okay, next one. Okay, so what's really interesting about this particular disease, this virosis, this viral virosis disease or disorder, is that a beekeeper will come to me and they say, look, I went to my colony, I got loads and loads of bees, I've got tons of honey. I came back out there to look at them 2 weeks later, and there's not a bee in the box. And the reason for that is that social organisms or superorganisms have a behavior called apoptosis. And what that means is that when an individual bee or individual in the superorganism is sick, it isolates itself, goes away, so as not to reinfect the superorganism, right? They're looking out for the big picture. And as a result, each individuwill bee will make an individual decision as to whether or not she feels sick. And when she feels sick, she flies off, never to return. And so what you've had here with this rapid depopulation within two weeks of your colony is that each individual bee has been infected with viruses, feels bad, and is flown off. Now this is completely invisible to you. To you, it looks like that your bees absconded or something terrible happened, poisoning perhaps. But really, this is just a normal reaction to this particular type of disease. The other thing is that you'll see emerging adults that were trying to emerge, but because of the viral loads actually died in the cell. And this is uniquely characteristic of this particular disease. So if you go in there, if you don't have hardly any bees or no bees, you see this, well, you know what happened. Okay, next one. Okay, so in beekeeping, we kind of use this concept of integrated pest management that we've borrowed from other agricultural systems. And this concept is that you measure your pathogen load, in this case, your parasite load, and you try to keep it below a certain point. Because the concept is that once it reaches a certain point, it will start exhibiting symptoms of disease that will cascade to a point where it will actually collapse your colony. So the concept is to know that you can't get rid of all your varroa mites, but if you can keep them at like 2 mites per 100 bees, then your colony is going to be largely pretty sound. It's at 3%, just 1 extra mite per 100 bees. There's all sorts of studies that have been done by the Canadians and Australians that indicate significant honey loss. And that's why the Canadians are freaks about going in really early in spring and using some kind of control technique in order to go in with really low mite loads. At 5%, you can start expecting really heavy losses, and that's all because of this mites virus complex. Let's go to the next one. So what can you do? Well, you can employ genetics. You can buy managed queens that results in exhibiting techniques or behaviors within the colony that actually naturally keep the mite population low. One of which is the Russian line, and you can Google this or look this up, RussianBreeder.org, and they maintain a line that was developed by the USDA lab in Baton Rouge in 1999, and those lines were then given to these Russian breeders, and they maintain these lines, and these lines exhibit a very high degree of control of the varroa mites. There's also the varroa-sensitive hygienic behavior. This was also done by the same lab by Jeff Harris, and then also I think by Harbaugh in his first name. Anyway, so this is a kind of an interesting thing. The bees will actually can smell if reproduction is taking place within the brood cell, and if they smell reproduction taking place, they actually will open up the cell. And because of that, it's thought that, well, it certainly disrupts the reproductive process of the mite. They think that it dries the mites out, certainly the male mite. And so this has been highly effective. And you can Google varroa-sensitive hygienic queens, and there's all sorts of people that will sell you these queens that maintain lower than normal mite concentrations in their colony. And then you got the survivor stocks. And these are queen breeders that they don't really care how the bees are successful at keeping the mite populations low. They just basically are selecting from colonies that are good honey producers and that also keep the mite population low. And then they'll sell you those queens, and with a little luck, you should have some effectiveness that can help you keep your population down. Okay, the next one. You can get up to a 50% effectiveness in lowering your mite population by just using these genetic lines. And of course, this is completely organic. And you're not having to do anything extra because the bees are always doing, or in this case, doing the work. So that's kind of nice. Okay, the other thing you can use is it's considered mechanical control. It's the screen bottom board. So the concept here is really simple. Instead of a solid bottom board, you've got a bottom board with a screen. And the idea is that there's natural attrition that occurs because mites will naturally fall off bees. And when they do, it falls through the screen and they can't jump. And if the bees can't get under there, they can't get back on the bee. And so it naturally kills a certain very small percentage of mite load year one. There's been studies that have been done in the University of Florida. Go ahead to the next one. Which indicate you get a 15% effectiveness at reducing your overall mite load. So this clearly is not enough, but the whole concept of integrated pest management is that you're attacking your pest or pathogen from all different angles. Any one angle might not be enough to keep you under the threshold necessary for your colony to thrive, but in unison and together, perhaps all of them taking a bite out of your parasite load will keep you under the desired threshold. Okay, so the next one. Okay, so if your mite population is still increasing, then you've got biopesticides. I use biopesticides quite a bit. These are naturally occurring in the environment. They don't contaminate wax or honey. In fact, in the case of formic acid, it's actually in the honey itself. Resistance is not likely created through biopesticides as compared to the synthetics. And the reason for that is because the biopesticides will disrupt various biological functions of the mite all at one time, making it quite difficult for resistance to be created. Much in the same way as it would be very difficult for a roach to ever gain or accrue resistance from a hammer strike. A hammer strike kills the roach in so many different ways. Resistance is never really likely to be created. In any case, these are all different miticides that are going to be effective at different times of the year. And I'm going to show you a resource that will help you study and research so you'll know more about how to try and use these and how effectiveness research has indicated they might be. Go to the next one. Okay, then you move to synthetic miticides. Now, I don't use synthetic miticides because I personally have not needed to, because I can keep my mite load under threshold by just going no further than the biopesticides. And I personally don't recommend synthetic miticides because Coumaphos, that's an organophosphate, that's really nasty. It has even high mammalian toxicity. And largely the mites are tolerant to it anyway. So it doesn't work anymore. Same thing with apistin, that's fluvalinate, and it also contaminates wax. All these pesticides will actually be captured in wax and have negative consequences for future iterations of the fruit. So if you can avoid using this, I certainly would recommend it. And if you're a hobbyist, you most certainly can avoid it. It's difficult if you're a commercial beekeeper because these things are so much easier to use.
Lane, I'm so sorry. Can you come over closer or come on this side? Because they can't hear you on the Zoom call.
Okay, I'm sorry, I couldn't see your room.
No worries.
Okay, anyway, let's go ahead and go to the next one. Okay, so this is the takeaway. You've got to know your mite levels. And of course, I told you nothing on how to determine what your mite levels are, because the best really source of information for that is the source that I'm about to give you that will go into all the details. But in short, it's typically either a sugar shake or alcohol wash are considered the most effective. Use resistant mite or use a resistant stock to mites, like the Burlesons, the Hygienic, or the Russians, or what have you, because you get a 50% crash in your mite count, and you're not really doing anything extra other than buying, a queen that has these behaviors. If you still need help, use your screen bottom board and other various biotechnical strategies, and then you can move to your organic biopesticides. But the important thing to remember is that you have to be proactive. There's all sorts of things in beekeeping you can do, and the bees will forgive you, and the bees will survive somehow. This is not one of them. You've got to keep your mites under control, or the mites will likely crash your colonies. Okay, this is the resource that I was referring to, Honeybee Health Coalition. You can find it here. It also has a lot of videos, so it'll teach you all sorts of things in regards to how to keep their varroa mites under control, what works, what doesn't. Goes into the bee and mite population dynamics, and also we'll have videos on showing you how you can actually test for your mite loads. Okay, the next one. Okay, the second most important thing, in my opinion, in regards to successfully managing bees, is that a beekeeper needs to manage the nutrition of the superorganism. Next. Okay, so first thing you need to understand is, well, what do bees eat? Well, they eat crude protein or pollen, which makes up most of the crude protein of about 10 to 30%. So this is what makes bees. All bees and brood are all protein. This is basically this is where they get it, right here. It's in the pollen. It's essential for brood production. When it's lacking, bees will shut down brood production. And so, you know, my way of thinking is that you want to keep very robust populations in your colony for all sorts of reasons, not least of which is that it produces more honey and is more likely to be healthy. And you just can't do that unless they've got pollen in order to make bees. And what worse comes to worse is that if you're not conscious of whether or not the bees are bringing in pollen or whether or not they have pollen stored, what happens is that the workers will feed the queen less. The queen will then start laying fewer number of eggs, and so your population will quickly decrease. But on top of that, if the deprivation of protein continues, they'll actually eat the brood. The bees will eat the brood. You might think, well, why would they do that? And the brood makes up, it's entirely made up of pollen or protein, and so it's very essential to the superorganism. So their idea is to kind of recycle that protein so it doesn't go to waste, since they don't anticipate being able to feed the brood to fruition anyway. And then, of course, pollen jars will trigger foraging, and that lowers longevity. And so that's another way that you just kind of eat down or minimize your bee population. Quite the opposite, maximizing robust populations. Take the next one. Okay, so what do they eat? Well, they eat pollen, and they eat pollen because they've got to make brood. But in addition to that, they eat carbohydrates, they need energy, and they get that from sucrose. And kind of the important thing to remember here is this right here. What you need to do is you need to keep about 15 pounds of honey in your colony at all time. Otherwise, the queen will lower her egg laying rate, and you're not going to have a robust population. So what does that look like? 15 pounds. It's effectively about 3 large deep frames of honey, or maybe 5 mediums. And if you're a top bar guy, you're going to have to kind of weigh, what it is. I had no idea about that. But anyway, as a rule of thumb, keep 15 pounds. And if you don't have 15 pounds, feed sugar syrup, because you want to keep that egg laying rate of the queen. The queen can lay up to about approximately 2,000 eggs a day. If she lays 2,000 eggs a day, provided that you don't have parasite problems or pathogen problems, you could accrue close to 60,000 bees in your boxes, which is a huge population. If, on the other hand, your queen is only laying 1,000 eggs a day, then the max you can get is about 30,000 bees, about half of that. And so if you're trying to maximize the population of your bees, it's imperative that you've got your queen laying at a really nice clip. And that's going to be dependent upon the resources that are in the colony, because they're always going to modulate their reproduction on the anticipated belief of being able to get resources to feed the brood, right? Okay, so the next one. Okay, so you need to understand, like all organisms, the bees always need to eat. So they need to either be bringing resources in, or they need to have it stored. And of course, having both of those things at the same time is better. Okay, the next one. So how do you know when to feed? That's what Marky Mark wants to know. And the next one. Okay, well, first you got to look to see where they store it. They're going to store their pollen right above the brood area, because the nurse bees are going to feed on the pollen. It's going to activate their brood food glands, and as a consequence, they're going to then be able to feed the brood. And so you'll find this typically right above the brood area. And something else I want you to notice is that you can see that the pollen is different colors. This is critically important, because some pollen has very low amount of protein. Like pine trees, for example, has only 6% protein, where on average, what you're looking for is the sweet spot of about 25% protein. So a colony could literally starve to death if there were just pine trees around, right? Well, there's been all sorts of selection pressure for over millions of years for bees to collect more than one type of protein for that very reason. So they can, like a diversified portfolio, they're spreading the risk. And if they have more than one, then they most certainly almost always capture the requisite amount of protein that's necessary for them to engage their brood food glands. And then, of course, you know what honey looks like, hopefully, and this is capped honey. And this is, of course, a bee bringing in pollen. Okay, the next one. So there's certain things that you can look at to see if you need to feed that can jump right out at you. Like, for example, these are larvae here. It looks like these are about like maybe 4-day-old larvae, 5-day-old larvae, something like that. And you notice that they're swimming in a lot of brood food. Now, the nurse bees are going to be really stingy with the brood food because it's very protein rich. It's highly sought after. And so they'll be really stingy with it if there's not very much pollen in the colony. But if they're inundating the cell, if your larvae are swimming in brood food, then what they're effectively telling you is that, yeah, they got plenty of resources. You don't need to feed, they're good to go. Same thing with drone cells. You know, drones are the male bees, and they're typically placed in cells that are on the periphery of the brood area. And they only really make a lot of drones if there's abundant resources. In fact, drone production is timed specifically during the spring when there's a lot of pollen coming in. The whole concept then is to be able to produce enough drones that inundate the drone congregation areas. So it's timed specifically for high resource times of the year. So in the spring, if you see this, even if you can't tell if they're bringing it in or if they have it stored, if they're making brood, or drones rather, making drone brood, then they're telling you, hey, they got tons of resources because they wouldn't be doing this otherwise. Okay, the next one. Okay, so what I like to do is engage in strategic feeding. You don't want to feed all the time because if they're bringing resources in, they're going to prefer those resources to the food you're giving them anyway, right? And so it's not really doing them any good, it's not doing you any good. Well, at the same time, you need to know when your superorganism needs to be fed. And when you do it kind of in a piecemeal, sort of strategic way. So the next one. So you'll do it, you know, and you can do it early in the spring. You get them to ramp up the population quickly because you want to maximize, we as beekeepers like to maximize and land that very high, robust population of bees right before the nectar flow, right? So that we can collect a lot of honey. So I try to get them going in the spring. Okay, the next one. And then of course there's a dearth this time of year usually, which means I'm not bringing in pollen or nectar. And so I've got a pretty big dip here of my population, and I don't want that dip, right? So I'll feed because I want it to be more of a gradual slope. And then what I'll do is during the late fall or winter months, I'll actually be feeding my bees potentially if they don't have resources, because I want those winter bees to be really fat and happy, right? I want the telogen stores to be large so that they're likely to last throughout the winter. Okay, so the next one. So what do you feed? Well, pollen substitute. You can make your own pollen substitute. I'm lazy. I buy mine. It comes in these patties, they're 1-pound patties. You want to put them right above the brood area where they would naturally store the pollen. You know, there's been some research that indicated that they're placed so that they're consistent with the nest architecture of a normal colony, that they're going to more likely to eat the pollen substitute. You typically don't want to put any more than they can eat in a week because of hive beetles love to lay eggs in this stuff. So typically, no more than just what they can eat in a week. And typically, if you've got a good population of bees, they'll have no trouble eating a pound in a week. In fact, some beekeepers will put in, 5 pounds. They'll just really load it up. Okay. So sugar syrup. Okay, so this is their carbohydrate, right? So no more than they can eat in 5 days, certainly in the summer. And the reason for that is because sugar syrup can ferment. If it's 1-to-1, that means 1 part sugar, 1 part water. If it's 2-to-1, if it's 2 parts sugar, 1 part water, it will not ferment. And so some beekeepers, like Blake Shook, for example, he feeds 2 to 1 all year, just because he likes the idea of not having any risk of fermentation. There has been some studies that indicate that if it ferments, it creates alcohol, it will lower the longevity of the bee's life, and probably humans too. I don't know, I'm trying to find out. But in any case, so you want to feed no more than they can eat in 5 days. You want to clean the container after every feeding for that same reason, so it reduces the risk of fermentation. And so make sure that when you're feeding sugar syrup, they're not backfilling or plugging. And that's just a beekeeping term. And what that means is that bees, if they're bringing in a lot of sugar syrup or they're bringing in a lot of nectar, and there's no place north of the brood area to store it and it's full, what they'll do is they'll start putting it in the brood area. Now, they never will put sugar syrup or nectar in the brood area unless there's not room. And they will move it as soon as there's room available. But because you're trying to maximize the adult population of your bees, that means that the queen, the ability to have the nutrition so that she's laying a lot, she's going to have the area or the room to lay a lot, right? And so as a result, you look for backfilling to see if you're overfeeding or you need to add room so you can have a nice intact brood area for reproduction. So the books say 1 part sugar, 1 part water, either by volume or weight, in order to stimulate. In other words, nectar during the spring is typically, it's almost, it's just sucrose really, and it's basically a 1-to-1 consistency. So it's thought in the spring that if you feed something that's really similar to nectar, and that will help stimulate brood production. And then 2 to 1 to prevent starvation, that would mean like fall or winter. And the ideal here is that 2 to 1 is better because there's much less work or metabolic energy required to evaporate the water out of the nectar or sugar syrup, in this case, for long-term storage. And that's what they're doing effectively, is they're just reducing it and condensing it for long-term storage when they make honey. Okay, so first 2 rules: control your varroa mites and control or manage the nutritional requirements of your colony. If you do those 2 things, almost everything else takes care of itself. We could just go home now. However, there are certain more nuanced things that you can do that still are a big help. But the first 2 things, well, those really are paramount. You just really gotta really be on top of these 2 things, in my humble opinion. Okay, the third rule is employ good queens. You need queens that are well fed. The reason for that is because the more they're fed, the greater the longevity of the individual adult bee. And that's what you're trying to do, right? In addition to manage the amount of bees that you're making in the brood, you want to keep the bees that are alive as long as possible as well to help maximize that population once it ends, right? You need well-mated queens, and you need to control your genetics. So let's go to the next one. Try to explain that more. So bees are one of the few animals that engage in polyandry, which is just kind of a fancy word that just means multiple mating. You can't really see that. This is the queen here, right? The queen will go to an area called the drone congregation area, and there will be lots of drones that will mate with her, one right after another. On average, Apis mellifera will mate with about 13 to 15 queens. Apis dorsata in Asia, boy, those guys, they get 80 drones, They do a real good job of multiple mating. But in any case, there's all sorts of evidence that indicates that the more drones that your queen mates with, the resulting colony is really, really efficient at all sorts of tasks that make it really, really successful. It will be really good, it's been shown, in being able to reduce the parasites or pathogens. It's better at wax production the more mates it has. They produce more brood. And every conceivable measure or index of a successful colony, when measured, if the queen has been mated, or the more the queen's been mated, typically the better the colony will do. And Dr. Delaplane, he's even done it artificially. They'll mix up sperm from 80 drones, artificially inseminated queen, Those queens do great, and so it's almost linear, the more drones they're able to make with, the better that they do. And so, we recommend, or at least I recommend, buying queens, getting it from a really good commercial guy. You don't have to, but these commercial guys, what they do is they will inundate the drone congregation areas with drones. I mean, they just produce drones up in yin yang, and they all fly to these areas. And so typically, not always because of the weather, but typically you'll not have any problem with having a really good set of multiple matings with store-bought queens. And they also spend a lot of time making sure that the brood are really well fed, especially the brood that feeds the queen, because there's been all sorts of studies that indicate that the better the queen is fed, as you can well manage, then the better the egg laying rate, the better the queen does. And so these commercial queens, they were rated by Dr. Tarpey in 2013 on all sorts of things I don't even want to go into. They're very meticulous, but indicated that, at least in his opinion, that commercial queens had a B+ rating just generally in the United States in terms of producing successful colonies. Okay, go to the next one. And these are all the advantages of multiple mating: better communication. They can identify high profit resources like flower fields with a lot of sugar in it, things such as that. There's been all sorts of evidence, studies done on pathogen and parasite reductions because multiple mating just makes them better at controlling the bad guys. Greater longevity and health, greater honey production, anything imaginable. You want a well-mated queen. Okay, the next one. Okay, it also allows you to avoid these queen genetics that we talked about earlier in regards to varroa control. Okay, next one. Okay, so the fourth rule, regular requeening. So it's not just getting good queens, right? Healthy queens that are well mated, but it's also you want to, at least in my opinion, requeen annually. And there's all sorts of advantages to that. Ensure you're keeping mite-resistant genetics, right? If you're trying to reduce your mite load by 50% by keeping a Russian line or a hygienic line, that kind of thing. If you requeen annually, you're more likely to maintain those lines. Those colonies are constantly superseding or exchanging their queens, making a new queen, replacing the old queen. And as a result of that, that's often invisible to the beekeeper, so they don't even know it, unless you mark your queen, so that you see a queen in your box that's unmarked. It's really sort of the only way you really know. But if you requeen annually, there's all sorts of intrinsic advantages. First-year queens are half as likely to swarm as two-year queens. And first-year queens lay significantly more eggs. And so both of these items are really helpful in terms of keeping a lot of bees in your box, especially right before the nectar flow. And so the next one. Okay, number 5, the fifth management technique, brood comb rotation. Now, if you remember, we talked earlier in regards to wax being lipophilic, which is just a fancy word that means that they act as a sponge and they'll sequester all sorts of toxins from the outside environment away from the living component of the superorganism. So although the wax is a part of the animal, it is a part of the superorganism, it is the inanimate portion, and what it does is it keeps toxins away from the animate portion. Go to the next one. And so it's because it's a sponge and because it's sequestering pesticides that it can result in capturing enough pesticides at some point where it bleeds in still the larvae that are in that, or that larva that's in that particular cell. So it can start having a pretty dramatic effect potentially on your brood production just because the wax is contaminated. This is especially true if you use synthetic miticides. You would probably want to change out your wax more often if you use synthetic miticides for that very reason. There's been all sorts of studies here. This Penn State study in 2010, and this really floored not only the beekeeping community, but the scientists in the apiary sciences. What this study found after surveying 800 commercial colonies they found that they were just loaded, the wax was loaded with all sorts of pesticides, a litany of pesticides, all of which could potentially have a synergistic effect. In other words, interact with each other, making a lot more toxin than maybe any one chemical would be by itself. Okay, let's go to the next one. So this is really good breed viability. I don't know if you can, this picture, I'm sorry to say, it's not really good, but you can see how dense the brood is, right? There's not very many skipped cells, but something else a little more nuanced. Nice. And that is, you can see where it's really, really white here. That's because the larvae are older and they become increasingly smaller as you move away from the center because the larvae are younger. This is the natural progression of immature development within a colony, because the queen will typically start in the middle and she'll start laying her eggs and then she'll move in concentric circles. So as a consequence of that, you should see in a very healthy frame of brood, you should see not dramatic decreases in age. You shouldn't see like a small larvae next to an old larvae, for example. That wouldn't make any sense. The only way that makes sense is that one of the larvae or larva died, was removed by the bees, the queen came around and laid again, which resulted in a kind of a difference in age, right? So whenever you see a non-progression in your brood area, that just means that something is killing your brood. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be toxins, but it might be toxins, which is why you need to, in my opinion, employ the wax rotation. But it could be other things as well. You know, you could have parasitic mite syndrome, you know, from growing lights, something like that. Or it could be you just have a family queen. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so this is very terrible larvae viability. You can see there's eggs next to a capped brood here. There's a young larvae next to even a younger larva. And so you see, and that's just bad. You know? That sucks. Your colony's collapsing at that point. But the point is that you want to be very cognizant of a gradual progression in age, because that's going to be indicative that you've got really good larval viability. And quite the opposite is that you could be having a problem, and it might be you've got contaminants in your wax. Okay, so the next one. So there was a study that was done by Jennifer Berry, and what they found was that queens prefer to lay in new comb. So you get higher fecundity. This is just a fancy word that just means that the queen's laying like a son of a gun, right? Because they prefer that new comb. So that's just an added advantage if you're rotating your combs, because in addition to keeping your wax cleaner for better larvae viability, you're also inducing a higher queen laying rate in your colony. But the problem is that wax is very energetically expensive for the colony to produce, right? There was a study a long time ago, I forget where it was from, but I remember they said that it takes basically 8 ounces of honey to produce 1 ounce of wax. Well, that's a lot of bee hours in collecting that kind of honey or nectar for honey. And so, in other words, it doesn't make a lot of sense to replace, you know, somebody might say, well, why don't you just replace every year, replace all of your wax comb? It's too energetically prohibitive for the superorganism to have to deal with that every year if you're going to have a good honey production. So kind of the rule of thumb is to only replace, you know, 2 or 3 of your frames in a year. So you're rotating all of your frame out after 5 years. And you typically will do that in the winter when your brood sphere shrinks, right? During the course of the year, I kind of keep tabs on how old the frames are. You know, if I don't have any resources on an old frame, I'll start moving it to the end, right? So that in the winter, when the brood sphere condenses, I'll have some frames that I can take out that's not going to have resources or something potentially valuable in it. Okay, number 6, swarm prevention. How am I doing on time here? Okay, so I'm going to have to go through this a little bit quicker, I'm sorry to say. Swarm prevention, next one. You'll see that you're likely to have swarm problems in spring, because that's when, of course, all the resources are coming in and the queen's laying like a son of a gun, hopefully. And so when you have a large percentage of young workers, it reduces the distribution of queen mandibular pheromone. And so when that happens, when the pheromone of the queen reproduces, is not being distributed properly, it kind of gets the colony going on swarming, right? Okay, let's go to the next one. So if you keep young queens, that's going to help reduce your incidence of swarming. And we talked about that earlier. If you queen every year, you naturally are going to have a little help there. Okay, so the next one. You can also you can reverse your hive bodies if you're using lanes, so that the cluster will go up to the top box during the winter, and then in the spring you might move the top box down, the bottom box up, because the stuff at all this added room will help reduce some of the density of the bees, which will help distribute the queen to the pheromone, which reduces the trigger for swarming. Okay, so the next one. Okay, so this is your honey and this is your brood. Okay, so the next one. So there's this concept of the next slide. There's a concept of what you want to do is that you can take these honey frames out. And if you take these honey frames out, the brood will move up, move the honey. So it's a way to kind of keep you in the brood area, so it reduces the incidence of swarming. They call this checkerboarding. And Walter Wright came up with this. And if you want to go on the internet and look up checkerboarding, he'll go into great detail on how you use this technique in order to open up the brood sphere, so it reduces the risk of swarming. I looked at Walter. I knew it was Walter Wright. But the next slide. But when I first heard about this guy, I looked up Walter Wright. And I can tell you, man, this guy knows nothing about checkerboarding. So it's Walter Wright. And the next one. Number 7, learn disease identification. It's critically important that you can recognize pathogens so you know what to do. You need to learn American foul brood, European foul brood, chalk brood, sac brood, because in the case of American foul brood, it's thought that you should burn your colonies, whereas these other brood diseases, although they'll set your colony back, typically if you feed and replace the queen, they self-correct in virtually no time. You need to know the difference, because if you don't know the difference, you're going to be burning colonies for no reason. That's no good. Go to the next one. If you get this book, Honeybee Diseases and Pests, this will tell you everything you need to know in terms of recognizing brood diseases and what you need to do in order to kind of turn your colony around. This is real important, right? If you maintain a brood disease, that means that you're greatly reducing the number of viability of the brood, and so you're drastically reducing the population of your adult colony. Go to the next one. Number 8 is control hive space. You need to monitor queen laying space, right? If they're plugging, like we talked before, you need to open it up. You need to stop feeding, because the queen's got to have a place to lay. And also, by controlling your hive space, it helps increase honey harvest and reduces secondary pests and pathogens. The next one. So, like I said, the queen lays 1,000 eggs a day. Or 2,000, kind of depending on resources or pests and pathogens. And what you want, of course, is very dense, packed brood area, because that means you're getting really good viability on your queen's egg laying, in addition to the fact that she's obviously doing a good job laying eggs to begin with, right? Okay, so next one. And so if you see liquid, it's not water, because they don't store water. This is either sugar, syrup, or nectar. You're decreasing the brood area, and as a result, you're decreasing the amount of bees that your queen or your colony is able to produce. So you got to monitor this and manage storage, because you want this to be an area where your queen can lay. For the next one. So in terms of increasing honey harvest, it's real important to make sure you got enough boxes for your colony. You know, you're in the midst of the honey flow. But what you probably don't know is there was a study that indicated that if you over super, if you put on 2 supers, as long as there's built out wax in all the frames, that there is a pheromone, a chemical signature that stimulates hoarding. And as a result, you get up to a 30% increase in your honey production if you just put more wax or more boxes with wax in your colony than you actually really need. Again, this is all hive space management. The third thing in hive space management is that it helps you control the secondary pests and pathogens. Small hive beetles, pretty notorious for this, also wax moths. If you've got too much real estate, too many boxes without enough bees patrolling, it allows these critters to get in there and really destroy your honey production. They're thought, a lot of beekeepers think that these guys are killing your colony. These guys don't really kill your colony. Your colony has lost a lot of adult bees due to bromites or lack of nutrition or something else, which has allowed these guys to get a foothold, and they finished your colony off. Because they're more like scavengers. They're not primary. They're not a primary issue typically. But if you don't have enough adult bees, you need to feed, maybe requeen, and you need to take off some boxes because you need to condense that space so whatever bees you have there can keep the bad guys out, right? Again, it's all just about space management. Number 9, only healthy hives. Don't put up with dinks. Dinks, I think, is just a made-up word that some beekeeper made up. A dink is a colony, it just never goes anywhere. It has 4 or 5 frames of bees. It just stays that way. You can't get it to go anywhere to save your life. A lot of people think that you need to combine the dinks and fall. And this is debatable because some people, what you need to do is you need to look at your dinks and try to identify why they're a dink, right? You can. If you've got a pathogen problem, well, you don't really want to combine a box that has a pathogen in it with a healthy colony, even if it's small, because then it'll bring both colonies down. So you need to make sure that you don't have a disease with your dink or high grow account. But other than that, it's often recommended by some beekeepers to combine the dinks because they're more likely to survive the winter with a greater, there's a certain amount of efficiency that's created with a higher number of bees in regards to heat generation. They're able to generate heat with a much less honey usage per bee because of the thermodynamic efficiencies created by a bigger cluster. And so that's part of the, I think, thinking behind this. And then in the spring, you just break them apart, you requeen, you can split, you can recapture your colony numbers, while at the same time, hopefully elevating your risk that you're actually going to have the colonies alive in the following spring. Okay, so the next one, bee education. That's what we're here for, right? That's what it's all about. American Bee Journal is great. As far as a book, the Beekeeper's Handbook, 4th edition, is excellent. And also Honeybee Biology, Dewey's book. This is the textbook that's used throughout the United States. It's pretty comprehensive. It's very impressive. Honeybee Health Coalition, we've already talked about this. This is your go-to source for varroa control, varroa management, and it's all free. Fat Bees, Skinny Bees is one of the best nutritional treatments on how to manage nutrition in your colony. It is completely free. It's a free download. All you have to do is Google it. Master Beekeeping Program, I certainly recommend that. And then, of course, scientificbeekeeping.com, Randy Oliver. I mean, he basically is a national treasure, in my opinion. He basically is a master. He's a master's in biological sciences, and he uses that in his own commercial beekeeping operation and does research that are extremely practical, specifically for beekeeping, and then passes that on to us free of charge. So this is really a treasure trove of really valuable information.
So there were some questions I saw that came in during your
Questions?
talk. So
okay, so it says, as I replace my frames, can I rework and recycle these old frames? Well, not really. I mean, you can take, if you're talking about the woodenware, you can reuse the woodenware. So you've got a plastic insert, push the plastic out, put a brand new plastic insert, and let them re-wax that foundation, that plastic foundation. That's fine. But the whole point of eliminating those frames is to eliminate the toxins that are captured in the wax. So you can reuse the frames per se and make sure that they re-wax whatever foundation you might be using. Any other questions? You guys have any questions? Sorry, I had to go through that really quickly. In an hour, it's kind of hard to cover. It needs to be like 5 best water practices or something like that. Okay, anybody? Yes.
We were talking about there's coming out, and you were talking about pesticides. Does that include just agricultural pesticides?
Well, yes, okay, so we talked about the Penn State study, right? The Penn State study said that there's all sorts of litany of pesticides that are being brought into the colony. The two pesticides that were virtually every sample and at the highest levels was pesticides that we as beekeepers use to control mites, namely fumifos and valinate. Those are part of the synthetic pesticides that we talked about. And then there's a whole bunch of other ones that you're right, they come in just from things that are products that are used in fields or people in their backyard, things such as that. So yeah, you're right. It's important to switch out your wax in some cases, not just because of the things that you might be putting in your colony, but also because of the other things that you don't even know about that they're coming in contact in and you bring into the colony and it's sequestered in the wax. So yeah, that's a good question.
Were there any other questions or?
Okay, good. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
That was a great presentation. I'll be sending you an email.
Don't worry about it. No, we'll donate to you.
Oh, my goodness, thanks,
Oh,
Lane.
yeah, you're welcome.
Lane's just donated
We're gonna
his
try to
library to the
Put
club.
that onto the website.
Thank you, guys. Enjoyed it. It's been a
That's
couple
great.
years.
Thank you, Lance.
Okay, so, who is Randy here? Like, who's our first meeting? Okay, so, I don't know about y'all, but I get really excited about the raffle. If you have cool things that you want to bring to meetings for the raffle, some people bring like eggs, a dozen eggs.
Want me to just do that slide for a second? Oh, are you? Okay, cool. Yeah.
All right.
All right. There you go. So I'm just going to do a real quick introduction of Dennis. He is the person that drafted the original legislation that if you are own property and have hives on your property and you get a tax exemption, you can thank Dennis for that, because he is the person that drafted the original legislation. He looked into meeting the right person. So you know how you say, I met the right person at the right time. That was what happened. And so I'm going to let Dennis take over and tell us a little bit about how he got into it, and then talk about ag exemptions.
All right, thank you, Janet. Appreciate that. Everybody here okay?
Yes.
All right, very good. And we're okay with Zoom?
Yep.
As long as they won't look at it, right? Been a long road, so to speak. And I don't have any idea, not knowing you folks, how many of you are using it or potentially could use it. Okay, there's 3 or 4 already. That's great. Brand new beekeepers? Anybody? Brand new? Less than a year. Yeah. Start. Very good. All right. Glad to have you on board. Absolutely. The main thing I was shooting for when I started this back in 2010, and then went to the legislature in 11, is to kind of bring some semblance back to the state in terms of, my granddad, and probably y'all's, or many of you, had properties, rural properties, and may have even made their entire living on that property. And I'll guarantee you they had a beehive or 2 on the place, because honey's good, plus it kept pollination, right? So that's what I was kind of looking for more than anything else, is to spread bees out over the landscape again as much as possible. That can't be done. We don't have the same kind of situations in terms of land ownership that we had back then, back in the turn of the century or so, because granddads died, the uncles have died, maybe mom and dads died, and all of these properties have been chopped up, smaller and smaller and smaller. And so what used to be an average size place of 400, 500, 600 acres for a farm now is 10. or maybe 20. And you see, I see it with the simple appraisal districts, counties, and how they are having to deal with all of these smaller properties too. So it's been a long road, but I'll tell you, it's been a good road, absolutely. And okay, what I want. Is the arrows? Sorry. Now there, very good. You know, if you've been around this and thought about this ag valuation business, if you've used it, maybe you've figured all of this out already, okay? But this is kind of what I run into in giving classes in different places just like this, is that, man, I don't really want to deal with the cattle. They are trying to cheat me out of this or that. Don't have any appraisers here. And that's not true. Let me tell you, I would not have their job. You couldn't pay me enough to have their job. It's tough, absolutely. But for us too, in trying to, as beekeepers, and wanting to use this law and on smaller properties, using, you know, what the heck is 1D open space act evaluation? I don't know. I've learned, you know, past 15 years, but I think in this next few minutes, we're going to learn just a whole lot and make it a whole lot easier for you, make you understand that. The law itself is there, and I'll show you that law, but we're not going to spend much time on the law at all, okay? Because implementation and how the counties react to you and I and beekeepers is what's really important. So there essentially are the steps that we're going to look through. The law itself, this portion is what's been around for years and years and years for standard, typical ag folks, whether it's crops or livestock or whatever. Okay, all that was added is this little piece right here. The only thing that is really a definite concrete portion of the law is that acreage size. That's it. Now, I have put in a couple of red words here simply because I'm seeing some different things happening over time. The law says raise or keep bees. Does it say what kind of bees? Bees. Now, what do most of the cats think when they see bees or hear bees is European honeybees, or I guess now it's Western honeybee, whatever. But there, in fact, are 3 counties in the state of Texas that allow you to manage and raise native bees, orchard bees, bumblebees. Any variety of native bee can still get the same tax benefit as if you were raising honeybees. A totally different animal, a whole lot harder to work with, but such is the case. I think that probably we'll see, I've seen from one county that allowed it to 2, 3. So there's a progression, and they are thinking about it. All of this is progression. The other portion of it is products having a commercial value. Well, what does that mean? That's from the original law. By the way, right there, tradition of commercial value. That doesn't mean that your agricultural commodity, whatever you're raising, has to be sold. Even if you're a cattleman, a row crop, cotton, timber, same law, same thing. You don't have to sell it. Will you sell whatever you're producing? Most likely. You know, you're spending a lot of time and effort and money to raise those bees and produce whatever you're producing, which typically is honey. It could be wax, it could be more bees, it could be any number of things. Mead, maybe you make mead. That is still a commodity. And it has a commercial value. I'm not answering to good old Uncle Sam and IRS. You know, do they want you to have a business of beekeeping and never make any kind of money? Not on profit, just money. You can get away with it for a while, but eventually they're going to catch up with you. But I'm just talking about what the CADs look at, okay? It has to have a commercial value. All right, who qualifies? Obviously, those that own 5 to 20 acres, right? Someone that wishes to receive their ag valuation on the property. Obviously, that's why you're trying to get into it. You're trying to lower those taxes. And believe me, folks, taxes have shot up, or the values of your properties have shot up the last year or so. I've never gotten so many calls in all my life. As to, I want to start raising bees. Why? Because my taxes are too high, you know, just go ahead and say it. That's what it is. I've even had somebody in Fort Worth that had property in downtown Fort Worth. And they were stripping off all the old buildings and going to build something new. They wanted ag valuation of downtown property in Fort Worth. Good luck, bud. Not gonna happen. It's not going to happen. Anyway, those desiring to be involved in agriculture. If you're raising bees, you're in agriculture. I don't care. You're in agriculture, and you're going to produce some kind of commodity. Most likely, it's going to be honey, but whatever. Anyone producing an ag commodity, raising bees, those bees could be a commodity. Willing to build a 5-year history. Anybody looking to buy land to do this beekeeping operation on? Good. Because what people need to look for, you have to talk to somebody else, you know, down the road. They're saying, I'm going to go 5 by 5 acres. I'm going to start raising bees. That's great. I'm glad to hear that. But be careful what you purchase. That land hopefully had ag on it before you purchased it. Otherwise, you're going to have built a 5-year history. That means you're going to pay full ad valorem tax for those 5 years while you're getting into this business, you know, buying boxes, equipment, etc. So plenty of people do it. That's fine, but that is a real quick, easy way to go right straight from livestock or whatever ag was on the property before to beekeeping, if it's already on there. Don't let it disappear. Talk to your CAD soon, you know, when you purchase that. Okay. Be in this business for the long term. It's not something to do. It's too expensive, too much trouble. You're not going to get into it and do it 6 months or a year, 2 years, probably not even 5 years. It's a long-term vision. And allowing other beekeepers to work their bees on your property, you can still get your ag on your property that way. In fact, that's turning into quite a business for some people around the state. Don't have anything against it. It's great as long as you're doing it correctly, or they're doing it correctly. Better, but some advantages that support other ag commodities. There are even a few counties that have put into their guidelines that you know, your apiary needs to be close to, in other words, within 2 or 3 miles of some crop. Cotton, soybeans, whatever it might be. They're getting away from that. They're changing that now. So that's anywhere your bees are, they're going to find something to pollinate. Trust me. It might be your neighbor's garden, but they're going to find something to pollinate. That's what that is. Save property taxes, obviously. Receive ag sales tax exemption certificate. Very simple to do. You go to that address, you fill it out online, get a number, print it off, you got it. Now, I sure would like to be or have been on the committee that said, well, some of these things we're gonna give the folks in terms of saving sales tax, some of the stuff, woodenware, wax, any number of things, tools, all of that is on that list. You can buy it, and you don't have to have or pay sales tax on. One thing they didn't include was your protective equipment. I sure would like to take them to my apiary. I'm not gonna give them a suit. We're gonna go look at some bees. All right, now go back and talk to the folks that, to change that. What it is, you may actually produce some products and some sales, I hope so. But the very, very most important thing, and I'll talk to you about that earlier on, is spreading bees across the landscape again. And it's helping. It's surprising how many calls I got back in 2012, 13, 14, where people calling me saying, you know anybody who can bring a hive of bees and put them on my garden? Because they're not producing. It's not producing. And I'm not getting those calls today. So it is helping some. I don't know exactly how much. I can't put a number on it. But I can put a number on this. And since this law went into effect, TBA local associations or clubs have increased by nearly 300%. Now, that's good for TBA. Probably some headaches for folks like Ashley. You don't have to put up with us, these small scale beekeepers or hobbyists. But it is, in fact, getting those bees spread out across the landscape. I've talked to folks in the clubs as far away as Sonora. So yes, it's spread.
Hey Dennis,
Yes,
question.
sure.
If you're in your 5-year history built up, can you still get the sales tax exemption?
Yes, you can. Doesn't cost anything for that certificate. It's just long as it's the items that's on the allowable list to purchase. Yeah, sure can. Okay, what did the cats think? Well, this first came in, boy, they were pleased, most of them. A few of them were. It's changing pretty rapidly now, even though we've been at it 9 years. You're going to see a lot of different things. The majority of the cats, they're using, most of those counties are using intensity levels of 6 to 12. That means 6 hives on 5 acres. And for every 2.5 acres above that, you have a hive. That's 12 acres. But you'll see everything. Palm Green County, out, it's not far west Texas, but it's out there. If you have one colony, good enough. They'll let you have it. And then Tyler County, they want to see you have 12 hives per acre. Per acre. If you have 20 acres, that's 240 hives. You're not hobbyist, you're not small scale any longer, not quite commercial, but you've got plenty of headaches. Okay. Would you assume that maybe Tyler County doesn't really like beekeepers? Such is the world. The 3 counties that do allow using native bees, raising native bees. It's DeWitt, San Sam, and Waller counties. They're not next to one another. That's what you tend to see, is what I saw when this first started. It really started in Harris County. Okay, he was the first one to work up a set of guidelines, and then it just spread like cancer. His buddy called him, that buddy called that one, this buddy. Pretty soon it was everybody had the same set of guidelines. Well, that's changing now too. Thank goodness. Okay, allow leasing the bees. We talked about that. Then a lot of different things that you might see in their guidelines. The only reason I put it up here is you still see some that say you must register with Texas Apiary Inspection Service. Must. No, you must not necessarily, unless you're moving bees. If you're going out of state or whatever, then yeah. But you, even though you don't necessarily have to, you're not required to. It's really not bad. Not a bad idea. Really not. It doesn't cost anything to register your apiary. I think you're going to see more and more of the county's requirements of having your name on everything, and addresses, and apiary number, a lot of different things. So it doesn't hurt. And if you're building a history, that just tells the CAD that you're in fact serious about this. You know, get it, put it in the file, and they have it. Okay. Any questions there? All right. Let's bring it down to Williamson County folks. Okay, what I've done is Williamson County here, and then I went, and every county that touches Williamson County around you, depending on where you might live. Anybody live outside of any of these counties? Probably most of you are in Williamson County. And that's great. But just wanted to show you some information, backdrop. Almost all of them, as you can see, the intensity level is 6 to 12 hives. Okay, that's pretty common. Productivity value, we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a minute, but that started out in Harris County, and it's still in Bell County, where I'm from, at $1,300 productivity value per acre. You understand what productivity value even means, why they use it? All of agriculture is set up on what the land will produce, depending on whatever you're qualified to raise. Cattle, trees, you know, whatever. Will the property in El Paso County raise the same type of crops that you can raise in Montgomery County? Obviously not. The soil's not is totally different, shallower, rockier. They don't get the rain out there in Montgomery County, even than we do here. So that's what it's based on. The productivity value is what you're raising livestock, what it will produce on a given type of land. That's all put together with by NRCS, folks like that, extension people that have gotten together and said, here's this kind of soil in this county, it's this deep, and this kind of rainfall, and you're raising cattle on it, or you're raising grass on it to cut and bale hay, it'll raise and produce X. So go to the next county over, like where I'm at, in Bell County, I want a pile of rocks. Actually, it's just one rock. It covers half the county. And it won't produce the same thing. So, productivity value, that's what your bees will produce, okay, per hive or per acre per year. If it was $823 productivity value, will your bees produce that in a year per hive? Probably not. A lot of commercial folks will, but not most of us. All right, where I'm at, $1,300. Wow. And there are a number of counties that are $1,300. Still a holdover from Harris County working all these guidelines up. But then you'll see things like native pasture value. Native pasture productivity value in almost any county, even in East Texas, is one of the cheapest ones. Least amount of money that you're going to pay as a productivity value per acre. There's not too many counties that use native pasture, unfortunately. Most of them are other things. I put some other information there. My old county, same as the current land category. What does that mean? That doesn't make any sense. Well, if you had ag before you had, say, livestock on it, in my old county, in this portion of the county, it produced X, okay? But that's gone. Cattle are gone. Now we're raising bees on it. So whatever that land category was then, that's what you're going to be paying now. Now there's a catch to that. It sounds like it might be good because most of the property all across Texas, in fact, livestock is raised on. And they have a pretty decent value, productivity value, very good. I haven't known anything over $200. So what you really want is, that sounds good, but some of them kind of cheat in that it's categorized as this, whatever it is. But when they find out that you're rating bees on it, oh, we're gonna, okay, it's that category of property, that category of land, but we're gonna add something to it because you're a beekeeper. The way it is. Not too many are doing that, thank goodness, yes.
And it's just so I'm understanding, in Bell County, is that saying that for tax valuation purposes, they are assuming that your bees produce a value of $1,300 per acre?
Yes.
Okay.
I can tell you don't believe that. You believe what's up there, but you don't believe they're gonna do it, and you're right, they won't. We're gonna get into something else here. You understand this productivity value is not your tax. It's how it goes into a calculation to figure your tax. So the lower that number, the better. Okay. Now there are a lot of those native pasture values, especially west of here, that are $67 an acre, $80 an acre. Huge, huge difference in that calculation between that and $1,300 productivity value. So just keep that in mind. I have to say something about Williamson County. I've had some issues with whoever was in Williamson County ag appraisal slot years ago. Aaron, I don't even know his last name. Maybe his private number, now you have it. That'll teach you. He has been very, very helpful, very nice. What he did tell me is, we've already hit on that, if you have 5 acres and you live on it, your homestead's on that. Sure, you're going to use that, certainly. Well, then all of a sudden you have 4 acres that qualify for ag. Poof, it's gone, right? So most people, would probably go out and buy 6 acres if they were going to do that. Aaron told me, point blank, write this down. If you have at least 5.2 acres, if you have your homestead on it, that means that you have taken an acre away, and that's normal. It can be a lot of different things, but normally it's just an acre. So then all of a sudden you get 4.2 acres, right? You don't qualify. You're doing Williamson County. So that's good.
He said the same
Glad to
thing
hear
at
that.
the Waters.
Well, pardon?
He said the same thing at the Waters deal.
Oh, really? Okay. Good. Good to hear that. Also, $219 productivity value here at Williamson County. Not bad. I will tell you, if it's anything under $700, it's good. In fact, I tell people, you go in there and you ask them what that is, and they tell you that it's $650, you say, shake your hand, thank you, and turn and leave. You're in good shape. We're going to talk about that even more here in just a second. Okay. Probably can't see this. That's okay. Didn't intend for you to. But you can go to, here's what it looks like on the web. I'm sure some of you have gone to the TVA site and looked under resources, under ag, and you get some things like this. It's front and back. And I'm just showing you what it really looks like. If you go to that address directly, it'll take you to this if you want to look at it. What we just looked at is this one. Okay. And this portion's not up there on the web, on TVA's web. But if you want to look at other counties, kind of see how you compare, you can go to that site and look at it. Things, Kaufman County, 600. A lot of these that are the same tend to be in West Texas. That's okay too. 335. Most of them were really pretty good on this side. Look at that one though. Calhoun County, 1455. I think that's the highest one there is. That's pretty tough. If you're in a county like that, you might wonder, is this really worth it? You know, knowing how much effort's involved and how much money is involved, am I going to make anything? I'll show you something here in a second. Steps. This is kind of an abbreviated set of steps. I don't necessarily have to read that. You can go to this address. It'll take you to this on TBA site. And I have a whole litany of things that are up to date and good to look at. A couple of things we will talk about. Obviously, the acreage homestead rule. Don't forget that. Generally, it's acre. Down here, rollback. Everybody know what rollback is? What it means? I didn't either. Don't feel bad. I didn't know. Rollback is simply the difference between full ad valorem tax, okay, that you would pay if you did not have ag, and what you were paying down here with ag. If what you're doing on your property, if it changes, it's no longer, you're no longer producing the commodity. It's not in ag. For whatever reason, there are a lot of different reasons. Then you could be in a rollback situation where you owe the county back taxes, the difference between these two, 3 years back, up to 3 years back. That's why I said something about long term. Get into this, you know, and then 5 years later say, I'm going to sell it to a developer. Well, maybe that's okay because he's going to pass on that rollback cost to whatever he's built. But you know, you as a landowner, you don't want to pay that rollback tax. Okay. There's the form that you fill out, open application 1B1, open space ag use appraisal. And that can be found at the county, all the counties have them, or you can go to the comptroller site and get it, fill it out. It's not that tough to fill out. I think that covers most everything. But always be friendly and helpful. You as beekeepers, if you've been a beekeeper at least a year, and many of you less than a year, you know more than the appraisal districts know. This is not their baby, okay? They're learning. Trust me, they're learning because they have to. But you know more about bees, any of them, than they do. So you still need to be friendly, but don't let them pull a wool over your eyes either. Okay? This is not horribly important, except for just a couple of things. This is the Bible that counties use. It's the current copy and how they figure ag valuation. Land is under ag. What qualifies what that? If you want your own copy, it changes every couple of years, at least a little bit. But you can go to this address, download it, about 100 pages. It's not all that bad. Tough to read. Okay, what I really wanted you to see is some of the kids are starting to charge this. It's business personal property tax. Okay, it's not new. It's been out there a long, long time. I used to pay it when I had a retail business in Troy that I talked about. You pay it on certain items, your inventory essentially. But what has happened, many of the counties are charging the beekeepers this tax on everything they have. Boxes, bees, honey, wax, feed, everything. They can't do it. They cannot do it, folks. It's illegal. Okay? If you want to read it, go right there. But the difference is, you know, when it goes from production to processing, that's where the change is. It's under production, and that means anything you spend or do to produce bees, to produce honey, to produce whatever, propolis, whatever you're producing. Okay? You go out there, you check your bees, you do the things that Lance was talking about, trying to control pesticide, Aurora, and a lot of other different things. Everything that you use, whatever you feed them, that's under production. Okay. your equipment. It's all under production. Where it changes, the processing is when you go harvest that honey, bring it in your honey house or your garage or back porch or whatever, and you spin that down, in your extractor. From there on, the extractor, the jars, the filters, the storage, all of that stuff is under processing. And they can and will charge you for that, tax on that. It's perfectly legal. We've been doing it for years. It's just that we as beekeepers are starting to catch up with us. You know, they're all looking for money, some way to run the county. And that's the kind of thing we get into. Like I said, I wouldn't have their job. No damn life. Now, a few counties right here are processing. In fact, put extractors up here under production. So it depends on the county you're in. And if you wonder about that, I mean, if you get a notice from them to pay this business personal property tax, and if it's not listed on there, I will talk to them and make sure they have the right stuff on there, the right items. Some counties can use this. Some, I don't know why. I don't know what the difference is. But I was taught that it goes up here under production. Okay, now we get into money. And don't worry about the exact calculations. I just want to show you certain things. Okay? Productivity value. That's where it becomes important. What they figured it on is what you make in terms of income as opposed to your expenses for you. That's where they get this money down here, this productivity value. It's through this calculation. They started out with this. Will your hives produce 74 pounds of honey each year? I never have. It's more like 25 to 35 pounds per year, per hive. Okay, but they still used it. This is what it's actually a retail. I'm sorry, wholesale price of honey to whoever. Okay. Even that's pretty high. But you follow it through. The expense is $60 per hive per year. And you just take it through that calculation, and you come up with this down at the bottom. As I was talking about earlier, is it worth it? My county's going to charge me $1,300. I saw one that's $1,400, over $1,400. Is it worth doing this? I can say emphatically that yes, it's worth it. Sorry. Because I know someone in Bell County, in fact, he's president of the Temple area beekeepers. He and his brother have like 18 acres. President does. They were paying full ad valorem tax in Bell County, and they built their history. Next year, when they finally got it, in the 6th year, it saved them 2/3. Now, this doesn't speak to money necessarily, but as an example, if his tax was $3,000, well, now under beekeeping it's $1,000. Trust me, it's less than that. So was it worth it to make $2,000 a year on sales on your property taxes? Yeah, I think so. So, and if you have productivity value, not in Bell County, Williams, a whole lot less than that, then it's even better. Is that tax, the actual tax is going to be a whole lot less. Any questions there? All right. Things to change, and you guys are in good shape here in Williams County, actually, $219 productivity value. Yeah. So, I wouldn't go to the trouble to do this. I'm trying to get the folks in Bell County to do this survey because of the cost, and because we have a new ag guy now, retired. Politics, right? That's what it is. But the things that need to be changed, in this MCAD, that's Montgomery County. They did it a few years ago. See that they followed it 13 through 17. Typically, a county will use 5 years worth of information. 59 pounds, still too much. 78, way over. 66, maybe they are producing that much down there. get a lot more rain than we do, so possibly. But here, the price per pound of honey, what they've started using, what they should be using is what the USDA takes surveys on across the United States every year to get bulk honey prices per pound. That's what they need to be using. And that changes year to year, of course. If they still kept this, and that's not enough, but, you know, bottom line, you know, it made a big difference, $506. It's even cheaper than that now. I don't recall now offhand what it is. It's not that terribly important. The point is, folks that are in counties that are paying or being charged productivity values that are pretty high, you know, need to take a look at all of this and keep records of what they need to do to go to the CAD and say, come on, guys, you know, here are other counties that have done it. Here's the information that you use. It's still the same information that you figured it with. And get away from Harris County, for Pete's sake. You know, do it on your own. Any questions there? All right. If you don't know Joe Bader, he lives down in South Central Texas. I think it's Van Buren County. A fine fellow that spent a lot of time going to different commercial folks as well as clubs or individual beekeepers and taking surveys to find this information. And all of it that I just showed you came from right here, came from this report. It's a good report. It's easy to read. It explains it better than I can in the time that I have. Okay. But what he's telling you is bulk honey prices should be something around $1.95 to $2.50 or something. That changes year to year. Average pounds of honey produced is more like 35 pounds. That's what should be used. Expenses ought to be $100 high a year or greater. And it changes that dynamic tremendously. But go there and read that sometimes. Not all that long. It explains it very, very well. But you need to write that down, take a picture of it or whatever. Got it? Now, we're getting down close. We don't know what time it is, but some things that you're going to hear, some misinformation, myths, facts that are all messed up, what have you. Your agricultural operation must be run for profit. No, it must not be run for profit. Not from the count of calves. Maybe from IRS, that's different animal. No, you do not have to. That's not true. You must sell your agricultural products. Show me in the law where it says you have to sell it. No, you do not have to. But that's, we'll see that a lot. Must submit your application every year to the CAB, be denied for 5 years while you're building history. That's not true either. It's not in the law anywhere. You know, I challenge them to show me that. Does it hurt you? That's one of those things like going to the Texas Apiary Inspection Service. It doesn't hurt you to fill out an application. It's not that hard. Take it down there, first part of January, sometime in January, have them put it in your file, and they know more that you're serious. You're really going to do this. Must meet the minimum intensity requirements every year building your history. That means that you've got, if you're supposed to have 6 hives, you've got to have them the first year. And every year is their own. All of these, everything. That's not in the law. Do not have to do that. Think about this. If I was a producer, a livestock producer, and they told me that, I've got 500 acres, and I'm supposed to have 100 head of cattle. That's probably not right. But if I'm supposed to have that the first year, livestock is what I had to build year to year. But they don't like those folks do this. We're under the same law as traditional ag. So no, we do not have to do that. Agricultural history. some say, this guy over here sold me the place. And so he had ag, when he sold it, poof, ag's gone. No, it's not. As long as there's some ag use on there. And you only, by law, you only have to produce 5 years out of 7. If he sells it, you've got 2 years grace anyway. Cats will, they watch those sales. If it changes hands, they try to get rid of that ag right quick. So if you're going to buy property, you're going to talk to people that buy property. When they do it, if it has ag, as soon as they do it, go talk to them. I'm going here. It has cattle on it now, but I'm going to do this. Save you 5 years worth of history of that person. Okay. Inflows. Go through all the stuff just step by step that we talked about. Acreage, rollback, homestead, et cetera, et cetera. Visit your CAD in person if at all possible. Still a few of them that won't let you come in. There are a few of them that have glass everywhere, and that's okay too. Bell County does, but I still go and talk to them. It's a whole lot better. And I've talked to every county in the state, most of them on the phone, unfortunately. I'm not going to drive to El Paso County to talk to the CAD about beekeeping guidelines. But if at all possible, go down and talk to them. You don't know who you're talking to on the phone for sure. And I have got some bad information that way. Not necessarily because they intended to, but it just worked out that way. Build your 5-year history. Here's about the only thing that they're real sticklers about. Don't miss the deadline. If you fill that 1D1 open space application out, changing, whatever to bees, it has to be in their hands no later than the last working day of April. Miss it, that year's gone. Technically, it's not, but it will cost you extra stuff. I'm not going to get into that. But there again, don't wait till the middle of April. Do it back in January sometime. Let's get this ball rolling. All right. Anybody been to Alaska? Spend some time there? You know what termination dust is? That's a term we use up there. But Alaska was once, so I didn't get there. Termination dust is simply, here's the summertime vegetation, snow's coming down the mountain. It's snow ending the summer. Okay, that's what the termination dust really means up there. And in fact, that's it for me too.
Did anybody have any questions for Dennis?
Any other questions? Did anything come in? Good. Shouldn't say.
Yes. Just out of curiosity, since you've talked all these different counties, are any of the counties open to taking an existing tract of ag land and breaking it up just for bees? So I got 40 acres with sheep on it. I'm intentionally going to cut out 20 and put bees on it.
You can do that. Most counties will allow. You can split it up any way you want to. And what you raise on it, as long as it's in ag. I mean, you have cattle on part of it, you have sheep on part of it, you have bees on part of it. That's the way you want to do it. That's okay. You're going to pay different productivity values for each of those things. Is the only kick that might get you. But yeah, most of them will allow that.
There was another question. What are good examples of historical ducks?
Anything that the seller, the previous landowner, they can give you. Most of this stuff is really on you, on the landowner. Okay, and how well you keep records. But if Granddad was doing it, he had tax records, or he had records of showing, I had this on the place for this many years. I spent this kind of money on it. No doubt in anybody's mind. Probably, any county that has given traditional kinds of ag to people in the past, they typically don't even go check on it, until something drastic changes hands, they sell part of the place, somebody dies, whatever. Okay? So there's not much out there in terms of a particular document. I can't send you to the comptroller's office or anything for like that sort of information. It's going to come from the landowner. So, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
With the popularity of beekeeping for ag exempt, do you think that the counties will ever start sending out inspectors? Because I'm just curious, because I could put 6 empty boxes out there, and as long as the satellite takes the photo on January 1, I'm good.
Yeah.
You know?
It depends on how the county, maintains or receives or gets that information. If it's from satellite photos, you're absolutely correct. But some of them are using drones to look at property, and they can get down real close and only see if bees are coming and going. I will tell you, guarantee you, there are no bee suits in a cab. Okay? When the appraiser goes out there, if they go out there in person, they're going to have the windows rolled up and the air conditioner going. They're going to sit there and pick them. That's still not too bad. At least they do look at it. Yes. So will they take a drone from the street and fly it over into your property to see if they? Exactly right. Yeah, that's the same as them coming onto your property. And if you've registered with them that you can't come onto my place, I'm not giving you a key to my gate. I'm not letting you come on there unless I'm there. That's the same thing. They shouldn't do it. Shouldn't. Kind of depends on the county. These counties that are that have metropolitan areas in them, Travis County, Dallas County, Tarrant County, etc. They tend to be a little tougher on everybody. Now, you saw some examples here. Tyler County, that, they don't have it right in it. We don't like beekeepers, and we're not going to let you have something because they have to. The first meeting that I had with several beekeepers and the comptroller herself said, if somebody's giving you trouble, come to me. Yeah, it's giving you trouble, sure enough, because they just won't do business with you. I've seen that. I also write wildlife plans with Brown County one time, Brownwood, met with them. That guy slammed his fist down on the table and said, "This is cow country. We're not having wildlife. No wildlife. Good deal." It's individuals, but that kind of attitude is changing really pretty fast.
So the same person had a question. So I guess, do they want, I think they might be asking, do they take pictures of their documentation or take a picture of their application?
Okay. As far as what you keep, kind of 2 steps here, okay? Whoever's asking that question. Everything that you do as a beekeeper, keep good notes, okay? Dates, times, what you're doing. You go check your bees every week or 2 or whatever it is. You don't have to videotape it, but at least keep notes of what you saw, what you did, when it was. You buy something, keep receipts. Sure, receipts are really important. And it would be the same thing for past historical documents. If you find anything like that, and that's really what I was thinking of, if Granddad sold a place, or I just know this fellow that he was older and he had cattle on his place for years and years. Now, is there anything he can give me in terms of paper? You know, it's not gonna get him in trouble with the IRS or something, but that would prove that he had it for all of those years.
So for somebody who's a beekeeper, like the receipt that we give you if you buy a nuke, or receipt for buying the queen, something like that on a yearly basis, that shows that you did.
Yeah, even pollen, you know, that you might be feeding with sugar, all of that, keep those kind of receipts. That's important.
And if you want to say, well, if you're contracting with somebody else to use on your property, then you get bill from them to show the county?
Depends on how they write the contract, really. I've heard some nightmares, really, especially, mostly early on when this first started. People were going to a landowner leasing the bees. What happened, what I heard was the appraiser talked to the landowner, he was not the beekeeper. He's leasing bees. And he asked him, who's leasing the bees, who's leasing their bees? How many hives do you put on your place? I don't know. Something's up, you know. You as a landowner don't know the first thing about what that guy's doing. You know, you don't necessarily have to have copies of everything that he's doing, but he needs to be able to prove that. You know, he's in a contract with you. He needs to do it right. There's some talk now of this type of operation taking place, and somebody whoever leasing billboards along I-35 that says, well, get your ag valuation and bees too, and not have to mess with it. That's not verbatim, obviously. But, you know, and then people, and he can advertise however he wants to. I don't see anything wrong with it. But I've also heard where they, as the person leasing the bees to the beekeeper, takes and puts them on the land that's supposed to be building a 5-year history. 5 years to me still means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Well, in 5 or 6 months, he pulls those and carries them someplace else. No, that's not gonna fly. So just be careful if you're gonna do that, or you're gonna get into that. Anything else?
Dennis, if I could comment on a perfect historical document. You mentioned registering with the Apiary Inspection Service. Even if you don't get a permit to cross the county or state line, they still like you to send in stats on how many hives you have and where they're located. And if you do that every year, they send you back a receipt that says, I told the Apiary Service where they're at.
I've talked to those folks every year, you know, and most people don't want government, they don't want Big Brother getting into their dinners, so to speak. I don't want to mess with it. I don't want them on my place. Well, how many Texas big blades? How many million acres, square miles, I mean, lands in Texas? How many counties do they have before? How many people do they have in Texas in the Apiary Inspection Service that are out?
Hello and welcome into my latest live broadcast. Today is Saturday. It is the 4th.